Okay, here we go. So what's the plan, shall we? What shall we talk about? Here we are for one little hour, 60 minutes. It'll whiz by so quickly, so let's make the most of it. So we're going to think about and analyze and contemplate and try and internalize maybe some of this information to help us know our minds and have the confidence to know we can change our minds. So maybe that's a topic we can use. So change our mind. Why should we change our mind? So that we can be less neurotic and more happy. So we can benefit others. That's the bottom line. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about this fundamental point actually that underpins all of Buddha's teachings from A to Z. All of Buddha's teachings from A to Z, as we say in England and Australia. So, and I think this is the one that really directly argues with the gut feeling we have. Because you see, the Buddhist analysis is because the Buddhist analysis first is that the neurotic states of mind, the unhappy states of mind, the painful states of mind, anger and attachment and jealousy and low self-esteem and depression and anxiety and worries and fears and all this stuff, which we are very familiar with, that these are not at the core of our being. These words are not complicated, but it's the most mind-boggling concept. And I mean, it doesn't fit at all with neuroscience or our modern psychology. And that's not being critical. It's just a fact. In fact, it's so shocking, we actually can't hear it. It's not like emptiness, which is really confusing. You know, you've got to squeeze your brain, as Amishi puts it. But this thought, this idea, this viewpoint of the Buddhas, that these neurotic states of mind are not at the core of our being, are not our true nature. And the conclusion from that is, and therefore can be removed. This is the basis of entire Buddhist practice. I promise you, this is it. This is what the Buddha is saying. So why is it so hard for us to hear it? This is the simple question. Why is that such a simple statement? But why is it almost like absurd, laughable, a joke? Don't be ridiculous, not possible, you know, that you can get rid of them all. Because why? Because simple reason is because they're really habitual. That's it. Because we're so habituated with these thoughts and indeed our own models of the mind, our neuroscience, our psychology. It's not being rude. It's not being critical. It's not being rude. It's just simply a statement, a fact from the Buddhist perspective. Well, I know from that, forget that word, that it's not being rude about our models of the mind and our science and so forth. But, it's not what we think. It's not the view that we have got in the modern world. In fact, it would sound bizarre to say that you can get rid of parts of your mind, rid them utterly, gone completely, That sounds like you've got to cut half your brain out. First, because we believe the brain is the mind, and that's fine, that's the view. Buddha doesn't argue we've got a brain, but he would say the brain, my way of putting it, I always say, is really a physical indicator of what's in your mind. But it still sounds shocking because we give equal status, our sciences and our psychological views, and therefore we instinctively believe without question that these parts of our mind are the normal parts of a normal person. The implication being that you would definitely not be normal if you didn't have them. And that's understandable. I mean, it's too shocking to hear it because all of our sciences and our views are based upon this, that they're a normal part of a normal person. Now, we can't argue that we would like them to be less. Everybody would love to be less angry, less neurotic, less anxious. That's why we go to our therapists. That's why we have all the pills. So we want to have less, no question. But there's no view that we can rid the mind utterly. There's no view like that. There's no experiences in daily life or no people in daily life expressing this or methodology to do it. But that's what Buddha's doing. That's all. That's all. That's all it is. That's what Buddha's saying. But because we hear it as religion, well, it's just made up stuff. Religion's made up stuff for us. Therefore, it's just somebody's weird idea, so we don't hear it. So it's kind of powerful. So if you're trying to be a Buddhist, if you're thinking you like Buddhism, this is the point that he's making. Okay, the fact is, to like Buddha's teachings and to like Buddha's views, you don't have to think this. You don't have to think about it. You can certainly think that you can get less attached, less neurotic. That's good enough. But the idea, the long term, that you can rid the mind utterly, that's a bit extreme for most of us. And that's all Buddha means by the word nirvana. When you've achieved nirvana, please, it's not a place like heaven. It's referring to the state of your mind when you have done the job of ridding it of these different states of mind. So in order to do that, then that really demands that we try and really hear carefully what Buddha means, which means we better look at what he means by even the mind in the first place, because it's a very different view, because he's not discussing here the brain. He's not recommending you cut out the bits of the brain. We tried that back in the 1930s. We called it a lobotomy, and we just made vegetables about people, didn't we? So he's not discussing the brain, because for the Buddha, as we know very well, he's not saying the mind is the brain. He says the mind is not physical. It's your cognitive process itself. It's the word used to refer to all your thoughts, feelings, emotions, unconscious, subconscious, and so on and so forth. But even if we don't even know the science of it, we don't study the Buddhist view of the mind, and even if we don't know neuroscience and don't know psychology, just instinctively, what we feel is the exact opposite. This is the tragedy, and this is the main problem we have. You see, the Buddha's view is because anger and attachment and jealousy and depression, whatever they are habits in us, and the stronger the habits, the more automatically, we know this, they will just pop up. You don't have to think, oh, I think I'll get angry now. You don't have to think, oh, I think I'll get anxious now. We know that. And because they seem to be coming automatically, this is why we just believe that they're what we call normal. When we say normal, we mean you'd be weird if you didn't have them. Of course, they're normal. Everyone's got them. So therefore, the first step in hearing what the Buddha is saying, if we're interested, is to really give some thought to the fact that the anger, the depression, the anxiety, the jealousy, the low self-esteem are so automatic, come completely naturally, which makes us think, well, they are at the core of my being. They are who I really am. And this is the tragedy. We don't even need to be taught this. We believe they are our true nature. They overwhelm us, don't they? We assume this is who I am. And that means we assume you can't change. I can't change. This is the main pain, isn't it? This is the main pain. So to hear the intellectual idea that anger is not intrinsic to who you are, it just sounds so abstract for us, because it feels like it's in the core of your being, isn't it? I mean, it feels like who you really are. It feels, because it arises automatically, it feels, therefore, that it's completely normal me. And therefore, it's really hard to even understand intellectually how it can change. And there's various reasons for that as well. So not only does it feel natural, but to even it's puzzling to think, well, how can I change it? It's an emotion. What are you talking about? My body feels it. How can I change it? What am I supposed to change? What am I supposed to do? You know? So I mean, it's not surprising we feel this way. So in other words, the first step, in essence, the first step is I would like to be less angry. I want to be less anxious. I want to be more confident. I want to be more kind. I want to be less jealous. We have to want that. That's your first step, isn't it? So then even when we do hear, it's not at the core of your being, and we're prepared to give that idea a go, as I say, to take it as our hypothesis, then it's confusing where to start. Because this is our major stumbling block, and I talk about this so often. Our major stumbling block is because we call these states of mind emotions, don't we? Emotions, feelings, which means our body is very involved. Our body, you know. We don't just feel them. We don't just experience them as sort of thoughts chatting away in our head. We do experience them chatting away in our head, but when they're very strong, it's a very physical feeling. So that makes us even more confused. Well, how can I change a physical feeling? What am I supposed to do, you know? So we need to be able to understand that means the relationship between these strong habitual emotions and the body. So really, this is why I find it's actually the model of the mind and the body from the Vajrayana teachings, which are the more advanced teachings. But actually, it's the system of the body, it's the system of the mind that the Tibetan medical system uses, and it's a bit similar, quite different, but sort of similarities between, in the Chinese system, these systems. So, we've talked about this often enough, but I find this very helpful. So you think about this model, they talk about how we've got gross consciousness, which is our sensory consciousness, what you do through your eyes, your ears, your nose, etc., which is linked to your body, obviously, your sensory consciousness and your body. They're very linked. That's your grosser level of consciousness and your grosser level of physicality. But then you've got this subtler level. And that's not, of course, this is not the neuroscientific model at all. So the subtler level, you've got this subtle nervous system, and this is what the basis of the Tibetan medical system. You've got this subtle, it's like similar to acupuncture, like I said, and Ayurvedic. You've got this subtle nervous system, these subtle channels, they call them channels. They're like nerves, nervous system, like, going throughout your body, 72,000 of them. And going through all those channels, this is where it's really weird for us, because it's not the neuroscientific model at all. All of our different states of our mental states, love, intelligence, compassion, kindness, is a very different way of seeing it. Very, very different. It's clear. And with all the different states of mind running around your body, your mind is linked inextricably to these different wind energies, or air, or prana, as they call it. There's a subtle physical energy. Of course, we don't posit that in the neuroscientific model anymore. It used to be, I think, in ancient times in the Western culture, they had a similar idea, Now they've got different models, don't they? But this is very much the Tibetan medical one, which is based on the Vajrayana. So the point is, these winds are running all through these channels, and all different states of mind are linked to all these different winds. They say the mind rides on the winds. So yourself, it's very interesting. Yourself when you're angry. It's like there's literally a storm in your body, isn't it? It's like a storm, isn't it? Not just mind, but your body it's like a storm, raging, uncontrolled. Because literally it's true. Your anger is really strong, and the wind, and that disturbs the wind energies, When you're really anxious and you're having a panic attack, that's your attachment mind making your wind energies berserk. So it's like you feel like you're going crazy physically and mentally, because the winds have gone berserk. So, a Tibetan doctor, like I always say, she'll feel your pulses, and she'll feel the imbalance of all these different winds. And because they're linked to different states of mind, and she will know exactly which different states of mind are out of whack. So by giving you herbal medicines, that calms down the subtle wind energy, which in turn impacts upon the mind, the different states of mind, which then calms them down. Oh, it's a totally, totally, not integrated, there's another word they use, in holistic, if you like, literally holistic. I mean, the most literally holistic view you could possibly have. So it's true, when you see a person yelling, screaming, angry, if you just look at it objectively, the person's having a mental breakdown, aren't they? They're screaming, they're yelling, the spit, like I say, the spit coming out their mouth. And then if you wrote down all their words, they're completely irrational words coming out of their mouths, because their mind and their body are berserk, out of control. So the anger is the mind, but it's because the habit's strong, it impacts so strongly upon the different wind energies, which is your subtle body, which causes your grosser body to punch and kick and scream, because they're so utterly linked, So there's really logical explanations according to this model. So because the mind and the body are intimately linked, inextricably linked, then you're going to feel, so the stronger the habit of anger, the more that anger states of mind are raging through those channels, the more the winds that the anger is connected to are raging through those channels. Therefore, you have a person shouting and yelling, feeling it physically. When you know yourself, when you feel jealous, when you feel anxious, when terrible things happen, and you think you're going to die from the pain, it feels like literally physical, doesn't it? Well, it's your mind, but it's linked to the winds. And that's linked to your grosser body. Now, it's a really holistic system. It's very fascinating. So when you realize the anger is mental, it always is the mind, but the stronger the habit and all that, the stronger the anger, and all that means is that it's a habit. Now, I mean, I know as a little girl, anger was like my middle name. My mother, I say it, my mother didn't have to teach me because it was a habit that I brought with me from the past. I came programmed with it. We all come programmed with our own mental tendencies. And the habits that are very strong, love or anger, it's up to each person. You can see some people, since they're tiny, love and compassion seem to predominate for those people because they've practiced those more than anger and jealousy. So the stronger the anger, the stronger it means the stronger the habit of having been angry. Whereas we think of anger as something that when someone does something mean to you, they kind of inject anger into you. And we think our anger is equal to the badness of the person. No, the anger is equal to our habit of having been angry. We know some people, the smallest bad thing can happen and they can scream and yell. Some people, the heaviest, worst thing can happen and they haven't got much anger, so they don't scream and yell. So this is a very, very, very different view. We so relate our emotional responses to the person. So if our anger is strong, we think your action was that bad. Just not true. The anger is equal to the extent of your habit. Your patience is equal to the extent of your patience. This is a hugely important point to really think about. Not just something that comes out of the blue when someone is mean to you. Suddenly anger comes, like out of the blue, as if it's not inside you. That's how we feel. It's a habit. It's a habit. That's why it comes so naturally. And that's why we think it's a natural, so-called natural part of who I am, which is what makes us think I'd be weird if I didn't have it. So when you think about it as habit, a bunch of habits, what's in your mind is a bunch of habits. Whether you're good at football, good at driving a car, good at math, good at music, if you've got a tendency to do something, when you do certain things, it comes easily. Some people, it's like that, isn't it? Whether it's emotional or intellectual. We can see it. They're the same. They're the same value for the Buddha. But we make the intellectual things very different from the emotional, don't we? For the Buddha, they're all the same. They're just tendencies in the mind. Whether you're good at music, football, or anger, they're just tendencies in the mind. We treat them quite separately. They're just your mind. And whatever comes easily to you is because you practiced it. Whatever's come easy to you is because you practiced it. And that's the tragedy. Because it comes easy to us, anger, let's say, or jealousy, we go, oh, well, that's just my natural state. That's just who I am. That's just who I am. I can't help it, what to do. We think like that. So it really is careful thinking about Buddha's view of why it's strong, and therefore, how can we change it? Well, it's not rocket science. If you've got a habit to do something, habits can be changed. You can develop a new habit. So the first step is you have to want to change your habits. We know this, you can change habits. And you see, what's also I find fascinating, when it comes to intellectual pursuits, we know we can radically change our mind. You can have zero knowledge of mathematics, But we know with a strong effort and much education, you can completely transform your mind into the mind of a mathematician. We know this is possible, but you could have zero, habit of being patient, but we don't believe that we can develop the habit of patience. It's quite shocking. It's quite fascinating. We're quite prepared to know zero about math and know we can become a genius at math. But if you're angry, no, that's just who I am. Not possible. Because it takes tremendous. Because and also the tragedy is when the habits are there, we defend our right to have them because we blame the other people for them. We kind of hold on to them. We strongly hold on to them. And then we believe they are natural parts of who I am. And the fact is, it's tremendously difficult. It's easy to become a brilliant mathematician. It is tremendously hard to give up emotional habits because they're so much more powerful. So much more to do with how we think of who we are, So we really need to think carefully about this view. This is the Buddha's view, if you look at it. And I find this Vajrayana view really very helpful. So are there any questions, please, about this or anything else you'd like?
Yes, Venerable. Thank you so much for the teachings. There is a question in chat. Please, can you ask Venerable, why don't most of us remember our most recent past life, even vaguely?
I understand. Yeah, very, very clear. It's very easy to explain. But I would first like to suggest that what you got to even ask the question, why don't remember most of today? Forget about even remembering when you're a tiny child. Forget about remembering every event. But we don't even remember 99% of today. And this is not meant to be a joke. It's what I'm getting at is this is the nature of conceptual mind, and we live at the level of conceptuality, which means we don't retain in the front of our memory, we don't retain our memory of everything. We just don't retain it. And so forget about a past life. If you can't remember most of your childhood, and you can't remember most of what you did most of this life, and you can't even remember most of today, but we assume, oh, well, that's just not possible. Well, it is possible. But the level of mind, the Buddhism talks about we've got the grosser level of conceptuality, which is the level we function at. Thoughts, which is our feelings and emotions as well. We're just not capable right now because we don't have very good concentration of retaining. Just think of if you had to, for me, it's like, at 7:20 at night, if I had to sit down and account, please hear my point, account for every single tiny thing I did today, I'd be a total, utter failure. We all know that. But we sort of take that for granted. So what happens is, because, that's just the grosser levels of our experience, But what the point is, though, we don't have much ability to access our memory. We have flashes of memory, don't we? Of this life, let's say, only flashes of children, a moment here and a moment there, like images in our mind. Now, the reality is, for the Buddhist view, the reality is every tiny thing we see, hear, taste, touch, and smell and think about every millisecond does not leave the mind, stays in the mind as a memory. But you've got to ask the question, why can't we access it? Because conceptuality is not capable of that. So this is pretty abstract for us because we only posit this level of mind in our sciences. But the Buddhist view, and this is coming from India from 3,000 years ago, posits these subtler levels of mind that are not conceptual and are not sensory. And we can all access that level of our mind when we get shamatha meditation. To get that properly, you've got to go up to the mountains and go away for several years. And it takes an enormous amount of work to completely subdue the grosser level and to access this subtler level of cognition. So at that level, we have memory, perfect memory. We have literally what they call clairvoyance, not just flashes, like some people have a flash of a moment of a past life, but clear, literally the word is clear seeing. You literally, because you've accessed this subtler level of your mind, and you're able to retain, to observe, to recall that memory. It's already in your mind, but we can't call it up. Now, we know from Western psychology, lots of people have different methods of remembering the past. People go into different meditations. People do different kind of methods of going back to when you're a child. So we know there are methods to do this. Well, Buddhism's got this method completely. It's been around for 3,000 years. You get single pointed concentration. And then because you've accessed your subtle level of mind, you're able to access those memories that are already in your mind. They're all there. And as you progress spiritually, your clairvoyance goes back and back further and further and further forward. And you can see the minds of others. And this is just part of the whole Buddhist thing. So the reason we can't is because we're living at the level of conceptuality. That's why, because it's not capable. I hope that answers your question.
Venerable, there's a second part to the question. It says, for young people and children, it wasn't that long ago. Why don't they at least have some vague memory of it?
Well, I mean, people do. I don't know if you, I mean, if you look into this, you'll see in the West now, there's an incredible amount of research, not just in Buddhist countries. There's a tremendous amount of research. And there are thousands of examples of people, exactly as you say, children, in particular children. There's so much research done these days. So I think if you look into it, you're going to find that so much research. And of course, much of it is taken as a load of rubbish, you know, because people just don't want to even accept the possibility of reincarnation. But there's so many people who do recall, and many who haven't been interviewed for books. People just recall, you know, so it's really not an uncommon experience. So if you look into that, I think you'll see that it's that many people have that power, especially, as you say, when they're young. I hope that helps. Yes, Barbara, sweetheart.
Thank you for your teaching, Venerable Robina. Would you talk about the difference between right mindfulness and right concentration? They seem similar to me.
And those phrases, right mindfulness and right concentration, where'd you get those from?
From the Eightfold Path.
Okay, so in general, then I can only answer it from the perspective of yeah. Okay, so okay, very good, thank you. So first of all, the broader framework here is to have this understanding of the different kinds of states of mind, and I often discuss this. You've got the negative states of mind, as we're discussing. You have the positive states of mind, like love and compassion, and this third lot, in which mindfulness and concentration fit. I call them the mechanical parts of our mind. They don't use that term in Buddhism, but they're the parts of our mind that enable us to function. So whether you're a murderer or a meditator, you need good concentration. Whether you're a murderer or a meditator, you need good mindfulness. So the simple question is, then, what is mindfulness and what is concentration? So concentration is the end result. Single-pointed concentration is the end result of the practice known as shamatha, or calm abiding in English, or jhine in Tibetan. This brilliant technique these Indians invented even before the Buddha. This and is described in terms of 9 stages of cultivation. So part of the process in those 9 stages, your first stage, one of the first levels of you try to cultivate good, or whatever you call right mindfulness. So this is a really, I think, misunderstood and got so many bells and whistles on it in the West, you know, and 27 different kind of definitions. But it's sort of first of all, mindfulness and concentration, as well as discrimination and alertness and intention and attention. There's so many of these states of mind that fit into this category that are absolutely vital in order to function properly as a human being. They don't have the character of like love and compassion and kindness. They don't have the character of like anger and jealousy and depression. They're different kettle of fish altogether, but they're vital. That's why I like to call them the mechanical parts of our mind. They're crucial pieces of mind, but they're neither virtuous nor non-virtuous, insofar, like I said, bad people and good people need them to do their job. If you're a sniper, you need very good mindfulness and very good concentration. Otherwise, you'll kill the wrong person. I mean, hear my point. So then the question then basically is, what is mindfulness and what is concentration? Well, mindfulness is actually short-term memory. It's literally the ability to keep to keep your awareness on what you're doing moment by moment without forgetting. So it's really not forgetfulness. But we think of it as a special holy state. We think of it as kind of religious, as virtuous. But as Lama Zopa points out, thieves need mindfulness, I remember some fellow felt I was insulting Theravadan meditation. I think so. He left the teaching that I was being rude, because we have a different definition of mindfulness. So mindfulness is the ability to remember what you're doing, whether you're cooking, cleaning the house, killing somebody, or doing meditation. So right mindfulness, I would suggest, is mindfulness done with a proper motivation. I mean, so that's why sitting on your bottom with your eyes closed, learning mindfulness meditation is in its nature not virtuous. It's not dharma until your motivation is at least renunciation, more so bodhicitta, and even more than that, emptiness. That's what qualifies something as a dharma activity. Whereas doing a good action to help another is in its nature virtuous. But these ones, an action of mindfulness, an action of concentration in its nature is not virtuous unless the motivation is virtuous. So mindfulness, in the first stages of meditation, the 9 stages, you're really mainly trying to cultivate mindfulness. You have to keep bringing the mind back to the object of concentration, because you're forgetting all the time. So at a certain point in the 9 stages, I forget which one, you've perfected mindfulness and you no longer need to make an effort. And then the next one that they talk about is vigilance. It's another one of these, vigilance, which is more subtle. And then eventually you perfect vigilance, and eventually all of this leads to concentration, where your mind can be effortlessly on the object without moving away. Does that help, Barbara?
That does help. Thank you, Venerable.
Okay. Anyone else? Someone else there?
Yes, I've got something.
Good. Talk to me. Who is it?
Okay.
Who
For the
is-
last,
I'm trying
the
to.
last,
I need to see you. Who is it? Who are you?
It looks like it's Deb and she has her video off.
Oh, that's no problem, Deb. Go on. Talk to me, darling. No problem. Talk to me.
okay, thanks. The last 11 months, I've been very different because my body has long COVID.
Oh, sweet.
And
I'm
so
sorry.
now, thank you. Now I'm actually healing my gut and starting to feel more energy.
Good.
Yes, I know. And I noticed I've developed many new habits, and I've had to completely drop and just let go of pretty much everything that my body has done in the past. But now I'm feeling energy, so I'm kind of nervous and scared and worried and fear. I'm wondering,
Yes,
how
sure.
do I get back into, real life and back into, obviously not where I was before COVID, but that before I was getting new symptom, and now I'm, wow, some symptoms are actually resolving. So
I
this
think you just said.
process is very stressful. Can we talk
Oh,
about
it is,
that?
Deb, but I think
Thank you.
I think the key to it, and this is the thing where maybe the regular medical profession doesn't talk about doing, the gut thing. You mentioned the gut. That's a really big deal for many people. It's a particular approach, isn't it? You fix the gut. So it's so fundamental I've heard, so fundamental that you fix that, everything else starts to work together. I mean, there's so many other systems, like you might go to a Tibetan doctor, you might go to an acupuncturist, there's so many methods of healing in the world. I mean, I'm sure you're learning that too. And I think that's really the key, I think, and this is what you're doing. You're really investigating different ways to make your body strong again. So I think have confidence, Deb. Have confidence that you can fix your body. So don't give up. It's the main thing for me. Don't be afraid, because it's your physical symptoms that are so strong that are stopping you from doing all these things, like you said. And of course, that's often, perhaps that is the view in the medical profession. I'm not trying to be rude, but we know there are other systems around. So I think don't give up and try whatever you can, try whatever you can and have confidence that you can heal yourself. Deb, that's my thought. And so then just take it one day at a time. What do you think?
Obviously, I'm really eager to get, back into life and to walk and to do things and, get back to where I was. So obviously, I'm very patient, but, dropping habits it's hard to envision new habits without my body punishing me yet. So it's a strange, I'm not really, it feels like I don't have a guide or a plan.
But you seem to be on the right track. You seem to be making decisions that are moving you in the right direction. I mean, you're doing that, aren't you, Deb? You're becoming your own, and I think we all need to do that. I think it's really good. Doesn't mean you don't listen to experts, but sometimes I think it's really good to investigate lots of different things. Is that what you're doing, Deb? I mean, I'm not saying you should. I'm just discussing.
Yeah, it's just the first time that something has worked. So
well, this is wonderful.
I don't want to, I don't want to get too
That's
dependent on it,
No.
because the next day it might not work.
I know, but then really look into these things and really go carefully and really take care of yourself and try and have confidence. I think it's great, Deb. Well done. I really hope you continue and you find your back to your health again. I think it's possible.
Thank you.
Persevere, darling. Good, Deb. Thank you so much. Anybody else there?
Venerable Renee has a question.
All right, Renee, talk to me, sweetheart.
Hello, greetings.
Yes.
Well, I'm not even sure how to pose the question, but I'm curious how bullying and being bullied kind of sits within this whole idea of karma, or how one should live. Because bullying happens from childhood and maybe more to some folks than others, and carries itself through adulthood. So I'm wondering how this notion of being a bully or being bullied is connected to karma, if at all.
Well, to answer that question, we have to get the sense of what karma means again. Just get the big picture, Renee. I'll just say it kind of simply. The Buddhist view is that we come, that our consciousness, our mind, is a continuity of mental moments that goes back and back and back for previous lives and forward, forward, forward. This is the bigger picture. And then within that, the fact everything we think and do and say is the process that produces the person we become. As Dalai Lama said one time, it's like karma's like self-creation. So the simplest, most fundamental way to talk about karma is whatever we think, whatever we do, whatever we say programs our mind. And so you could argue, therefore, whatever we experience can only be the fruit of past karma. There can't be, if you take the law of botany, which is the principle that, everything you put in a garden will manifest as a fruit, a herb, a weed, a flower. So logically, you reverse it. Whatever's in the garden can only have come from a seed planted in that garden. So if you think of your life like your garden, then necessarily whatever we experience, including all the good things, all the happy things, all our own good tendencies, all our good experiences, all the marvelous things that happen, and indeed all the painful, suffering things that happen, are the fruit of our past actions. But that's not in only the cause. I mean, we are very social beings. Would you agree with that? So forget about the past, but if you look at your life now, you've got relationships with people. I mean, you can talk about in your life since you're born, you meet humans, mummy, daddy, rats, cockroaches, ants, dogs, cats, humans, next door neighbors. You meet bad people, you meet good people. And we can see that if you want to analyze it throughout your life, you could divide all those beings into those who've harmed you and those who've helped you. You understand my point? So the Buddhist view would be we've got this strong history with each other. And because it's a natural law, like botany, nothing can be random. It's a big topic for us because it's so opposite to what we think. So that's the broader point. So now, next point, we call it bullying. I mean, all that means is, I'm not being rude, is people being mean to us in a particular kind of way, isn't it? So some of us are more victimized, some of us are more the bully, some can be even both. So it's karma between beings. It's karma between us that we either feel victimized. We meet a lot of people who are harmful to us. Our father brutalizes us. Our next door neighbors are harming us. Our boyfriend harms us. The kids at school harm us. Or some kids don't get brutalized. They only have good experiences, or you have a bit of both. So the broader picture, of course, everything is finally to do with karma. But then the specific point is, if you're a victim of it, then there's a lot of work we have to do. I mean, as a little child, it's quite hard to make those choices. But if we can see that tendency in our lives, often it's a certain kind of mind we have that makes us victims to others, especially if we're kind and soft and we feel that that's why we get victimized, that's why we get bullied. Not necessarily. It's because I think the bigger anyway, so I think we just have to look into our minds, and then the Buddhist view is about the mind, what anger is, and bullying is just anger. Bullying is kind of a mixture, it seems to me. Bullying is a bit of a mixture of arrogance and anger together. A person who bullies another feels superior, and then they are mean to a person. So it's like anger and arrogance, isn't it? So if you're the victim of it, we've got a lot of work to do, I mean, yeah, I'm just talking very generally, Renee. I don't know if that's helpful to you.
It is. It's a good start for me.
In what way? I mean, is it something that for you you're struggling with? For example, I'm trying to be too personal. I don't want you have to talk about it if you don't want to.
It's a thread, it's a thread, and bullying, just as a concept, or seeing it happen, or bigger, worldwide or personal, it just seems to be something that I'm always grappling with, and not really understanding where it's coming from or why it's
related to. I mean, if you are a bully, that means, Buddhism talks about the mind. So if one has a tendency to be a bully, it's because you're angry, isn't it? You're angry and you're arrogant and you're pointing fingers at other people, and then you're very much and usually bullies only choose soft people to be mean to, because they wouldn't choose another bully because you beat each other up, But I mean, but I think the key one is, in either case, the bully has to look into their mind, have a bit of humility, and stop harming people. And the person being bullied would be good if the other person stopped bullying them. But if they don't, then if we're trying to practice knowing our own mind, we're going to look into our mind and see what we can do about it. It's not a magic answer, And I think, but underlying much of this from the Buddhist perspective is attachment. And this attachment, one of the deepest attachments we all have, which is a source of so much of our pain, is we have this very strong emotional need to be approved of by others. So if we've got that strong attachment, as well as being a nice person, then you easily can get misused by other people. Because, it's like mummy's little helper. You're trying to be a good girl. You're willing to help other people, and that's good. You can't argue that goodness is good, not good. But mixed with that is this neediness to be a good girl, the neediness to be seen as a good girl, and that's the part that makes us very vulnerable to bullies. You could put it that way. You understand me?
I do. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Renee. Somebody else? No? Yes. Alicia, talk to me.
Venerable, thank you so much for your teachings.
Good, darling.
I have a question about when I find myself getting angry about the harm that is done, whether it's done, say, on an environmental level or people harming each other personally, and you feel the anger rising. And
yes.
The other day I was trying to think about the fact that the attachment is the problem. Like if I was a bodhisattva, yeah. I could want to help without the attachment and the anger getting in the way. But it started to feel like that almost becomes kind of apathy or letting people off the hook or something. Or
I understand, darling.
I'm just grappling with it because I know it's not helpful, but it's really hard.
No, darling, it's a minefield. It's a minefield because there's so many bits and pieces all involved in this. So let's do a bit of analysis, shall we? So are you particularly talking about suffering out there, like a war or the environment or something? Is that what you're talking about? Or you're talking about personal life? Which one?
There's actually two branches of it for me. On the one hand, it's the first thing you said, it's the war and it's climate change and the environment. And on the other hand, it's very personal things within my family as well.
Let's look at the personal.
Yeah, so
I think it was a different, let's look at the personal one. So, and it's very similar, it's this discussion right now with Renee about so-called bully, So when we listen to the Buddha's teachings, as you very well know, we're trying to take it as advice for ourselves, isn't it? It's not like a political statement. Oh, I wish, one of the common things that happens, people come to the Buddhist teachings, oh, I wish my boyfriend was here. He needs to hear this. I wish my mother was here. She needs to hear this. Well, I'm sure they do. But meanwhile, we are hearing it. So all we can do is try and hear these teachings as advice for oneself. So maybe if we are in a situation where, you know, your brother's always mean to you, your mother always bullies you, your father's this, or whatever it might be, everyone's got a scenario, then we can't help but sort of hear the teachings in reference to what they're doing. But all we can do is try and use the teachings to look into our own mind and see what I can do with all of this. So now the point is this. Okay, so there's people harming us. Join the universe. We all know that, Alicia. People harm us. This is very simple. It's very clear. People harm others. We know that. So that's the first point. So then clearly everything is a question of what you can handle. So if in the very first stages of practice, in your relationship with whoever it might be, where you've been the one who's been bullied or harmed or whatever it is, if one of the first things to look at is, well, if I can't, it's too much for me. I'm not even equipped yet mentally to be able to handle this, and I don't know quite what to do. So one of the first steps, and this is often the most difficult one for us, is to move away from it, is to not be in the relationship. But the tragedy is when we're caught up in the victim mentality, which is what ego is, everybody's in it, then it doesn't occur to us that we should leave the relationship. Oh, I couldn't do that. People won't approve of me. Oh no, he really does love me after all. No, well, it's just my mother. How can I leave my mother? Well, I mean, we've got to know, because in the end, it's kind of hard to hear it. There's really two options. If you really, really cannot handle what's coming from the other person, and if you have the luxury of choice, my friends in prison don't have the luxury of choice. You get my point here. They cannot open that door and walk out. But if you have that choice, that already is a really powerful decision to make. But the tragedy is when we're caught up in being miserable, we feel hopeless, and it doesn't even occur to us that I could stop having this relationship. That's already a very brave attitude to have. It's a very brave step to take. And if we did, I mean, it's a really powerful one. But sometimes we live in that, we spend our life in our job. You come home, I complain about the boss, I complain about the colleagues, and they are mean. Let's say the boss is mean. Let's say the colleague is mean. And you say to me, well, you know, Robina, you could leave. No, not possible. I'll never get another job. And then you say to me, well, Robina, you could take Buddha's advice, and if you can't leave the job, then if you can't change the job, try to change your mind. No, can't do that. So we are paralyzed. We can't change our mind, and we don't believe we can change the situation. And there's only two choices when it comes down to it, if you're really being brutal. So it's quite powerful. So you don't the idea, Buddha's saying eventually you can work on your mind, and like you just said with bodhisattvas, they're able to live with the most shitty people on the planet, but it's like water off a duck's back for them because they've done the work. But if we're not at that level and we cannot handle what's happening in that relationship, we need to have the power to leave it. So that's the first point. Alicia. What do you think of that? Then we'll go to the next one. Is that even something that seems relevant to you? My point. Something we don't even.
I definitely hear the point. I think it's not so relevant for the experiences I'm having at the moment, but I definitely hear the point.
Because that sure. So then what you're suggesting.
So I think what I have to do is work on my mind.
Yeah, that's exactly. So that's right, darling. Like my friends in prison, they don't have the luxury to leave the environment. So then the only other option, and there's more to it as well, there's only other option is to see if we can work on our mind. So now, but also this doesn't mean you can't ask the person to stop. It doesn't mean you can't have a discussion. But what we tend to do is feel all we can do is tell the other person that they're wrong and to stop harming me. And we don't think there's anything to do in our own mind. So it doesn't mean you can't have a civilized conversation with this person, depending on who it is, or people in general, everybody. That doesn't mean you can't. But the first thing is, unless we work on our own mind, no matter how much conversation you have, nothing will change. Do you see what I'm saying? We need to have a lot of precision in this job. There's a lot of clarity to know where to work, you know? You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because by you learning to be kind and compassionate does not mean you're letting the person off the hook, because everything anybody does anyway is going to bring results to them. They're never off the hook. There's no such thing. But we feel if I'm being patient, they're off the hook. It's not like that. And if you have that view, that's just the view of a victim, and you end up getting it suffering in other ways. It's a very powerful practice if we can be forgiving and if we can be loving. But actually, Alicia, that's a more advanced practice. That's the compassion wing. The very first level of practice is to know our own mind, to know our own attachment, our own fears, our own jealousy, our own depression, our own anger, and see if we can work on that. So the stages of practice, the very first level is live If you really cannot leave, then you have to work on the mind. And then you can also have discussions with the person, but half the time the reason we have discussions is because we believe that they've got to stop. They're the problem. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, there's nothing wrong with pointing out a person's fault to them. You've got to be very careful with that, but there's no guarantee they're going to change. Do you understand my point?
Mm.
Do you understand my point? Am I discussing the things that are relevant to you in this discussion or not? Or there's some pieces that aren't being answered?
I think if I could ask a more specific question, I guess,
Yep.
like if you can see people taking actions that, let's say, are causing environmental harm, just
And
to
now you're
broaden
talking
it
about
out.
other people now, not oneself.
Yes,
Like people
yeah,
harming each other, harming the world, harming the environment, and so on. So the question is,
yeah.
good. So the question is,
What is the question?
Yeah.
How when the anger and the attachment rises in response to that,
yep,
it feels like I guess I'm struggling to it feels like if you give those up, then you're just accepting that that's fine.
right, exactly.
And I know that's not, I know that's not right.
That's right. So what you're conflating is, let's say someone does something to harm another, including the environment. So what arises in our mind immediately, we would say, would be anger. How dare they do that? So then you think,
because it's harming people.
That's right.
Because it's causing harm.
Yes. That's, well, yeah, no. So the anger, this is the interesting point, Alicia. There's two things happening. One is, let's just keep it simple. One is a person punches somebody else in the nose. Forget the environment, anything. You see a person punch a person in the nose. So you get angry and you say it's because they're harming somebody. No, you get angry because your attachment doesn't like problems. But so when you give up anger, that doesn't mean the person didn't punch. That doesn't mean you still can't tell the person not to punch. That doesn't mean that at all. But because we think anger is called finding fault, then you think you throw the baby out with the bathwater. I mean, if you see a person punch a person in the nose, they punch a person in the nose. That's called a punch. But we add anger on top of it. And then you think if you give up anger, then you don't care, let them punch. No, that's nihilism. So it's, I mean, actually, as Martin Luther King said, it's good to be angry. He meant it's good to find fault. It's good to see, look at the injustice, look at the suffering, look at the racism, look at the poverty. But then you say, how can I help? You don't give up and therefore not care, because we assume anger means giving up anger means you don't care. No, just giving up anger means giving up agitation and kind of distress. If you're not angry, you still see a person punch a person in the nose, and you will have compassion, not only for the person who's being punched, but even for the puncher. And then if you can intervene, you will. And if you can't, you won't. So the difference is, it's a bit like when you have a headache, we assume, well, of course I'm angry. No. Anger is a response to the headache. Headache is a physical pain. You can change your attitude. So if you give up anger, it doesn't mean you haven't got a headache, but now you'll be more equipped to do something reasonable about it. The same with the world, the same with political activity. But we assume being angry means finding fault. When you say there's a war in Ukraine, that's not anger, that's a fact. But being angry is extra on top. How dare they do this? Who's the blame? All agitated. So giving up anger doesn't mean you give up caring. In fact, you care even more. And then if you can do something to help, you do it. And if you can't, then what can you do? Can you hear me?
And so, yeah. So if it was a bodhisattva that was standing there seeing someone punching someone else in the face, they would know what to do because they've done the work on
They might
mind. They would know
immediately.
How to help.
Of course, they'd have a wisdom to know exactly what to do.
Okay.
They would have, and we can attempt to practice that. We're going to attempt to have the wisdom to. But the key thing is, from the bigger picture point of view of compassion, and this is what takes time in our world, very difficult, is to have compassion for both people. It's a bit like if you've got two kids and you love them both, and one is the bully and one is the victim. You love them both, and you have compassion for both. And you try to help both of them. You're firm with one and you're gentle with another, but you love them both. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Rita. A good point. Yes, Mary, we've got 5 minutes to go. Yes.
I don't see any other questions. Please raise your hand if you have a question.
This is a key one. I mean, this is a massive point, the one we've been discussing, you know. When we take this Buddhist view, this analysis of the mind, that you've got the virtuous, positive, reasonable states of mind, intelligence, kindness, love, compassion. There's something about them that's very clear. They're related to others. They're interdependent. They're not distressed. They're not neurotic, and they're productive. But they're mixed along with anger and attachment, and we just don't see the difference, you know. So, and then again, this one of assuming, like I say, the headache one's a good example. Well, of course I'm angry. I've got a headache, we'll say. But not of course. Not of course. And it's exactly the same. Well, of course I'm angry. Look at that person kick a dog. We assume, because it is true there's a headache. It is true a person's kicking a dog. It is true that kicking a dog is not a valid action. These are facts. They're facts. But anger isn't merely saying, oh, look at that guy kicking a dog. Anger isn't merely saying, oh, look, I've got a headache. Anger is this exaggerated, neurotic result of your attachment not getting what it wants. Attachment is this emotional, neurotic little kind of vampire inside us that doesn't like problems. It's completely self-centered. So we get angry because our attachment doesn't get what it wants. Compassion is the response to the dog being kicked. Compassion is the response to the war in Ukraine. But it takes time to see this, you know. Then you say, as like Martin Luther King said, what can I do to help? Whereas just anger, ranting and raving, this is a huge point. And even when it comes to our own pain, our own headache, it's a revelation that actually we suffer a lot more when there is anger, because it's coming from such distress, it's coming from attachment, it's coming from fear, it's coming from resistance. That's really strong. That mental suffering is quite powerful, and that makes the suffering of the headache a lot worse. So it's a revelation to be able to distinguish in that case between the sensory experience of a headache and the mental experience of how we interpret the headache. And it's exactly the same with the war zone, with people. I mean, in other words, forget even bodhisattva, Alicia. Some people even just have a kind nature, a patient nature, don't get very angry. They can be in terrible situations of such suffering, but they don't get angry. They see, what can I do to help? They're not distressed. They see different things. They've got a very different picture, and they try to see, what can I do to help? That keeps you steady. That keeps you clear. I remember the Dalai Lama in one interview with a journalist. The journalist said, well, anger looks like it's really good. It makes you act. He said, I know what you mean, but if you're mainly only acting out of anger, it doesn't last. It's all emotional and then it stops. Whereas if you're acting out of compassion, it's more stable and you don't give up. And it's more reasonable and it's more rational. It takes time, my goodness, but we really have to see that the relationship between anger and our attachment is very strong. And it's a shock to hear this. We assume we get angry if we see someone kick a dog. Not at all. But why we get angry is because we have the view that the dog is an innocent victim and the wicked man kicking him. Whereas if you have the view of karma, and that really takes time, we know that they've both got this relationship, and one created the cause to be kicked and one created the cause to kick. And you have compassion like that for those two children. You have compassion for both, and you can intervene really strongly, but for their both sake. That's very, very different. That's not the same as anger. To understand people. It's a really important point. Well, that's it. Our hour gone like a dream in 1 second. It started 1 second ago and it's a whole hour. Look at that. We fit a lot in 1 second, didn't we? God. All right, precious ones. Dang Trub, Semchog Rinpoche, Makye, Panam Kyeguchi, Kepa Nyampa, Mepa Young, Gong Ne, Gondu, Paba Shog. And may we just continue never giving up, seeing our mind, being clear, distinguishing between delusions and virtue. It's a huge, huge point, you know. And learning to realize that they're not, these neuroses are not at the core of our being, and that they are the source of our pain and suffering, and how we've got this marvelous potential. So not to give up working on it, everybody. Okay. Thank you so much. Much love, people. Much love. Thank you. Everybody.